that can be affected by many of the discoveries that have happened in the last 100 years in reference to archaeology. The question we're going to explore is, what did the earlier poskim do with archaeology that existed beforehand, and will that shed a light on how we should be using archaeology? Obviously, there are many things that you can think even in present day. Present day, obviously, the tchielas is one question. There's a very simple, fascinating reference to the size of a kazayas. If you go and you find the olives that existed in the time of the Mishnah, then the you would be able to establish shiurim. So we will see how shiurim evolved. Possibly the sizes of shkolim is going to be a very significant issue that's going to be debated. I give one fascinating example. The lulav that we have, the question is exactly what is a date palm? And according to the scientists, it's been proven that the vast majority by DNA of the date palms that exist in Eretz Yisrael are imported. They're not actually indigenous, I think is the right word, to Eretz Yisrael, to the extent that they found, actually in Masada, they found a preserved 2,000-year-old seed, and they were able to actually grow it. They were able to actually have the seed grow, and there is a date palm that's called the Misushelach. A little bit of biology. Date palms have both male and females. So the three seeds, unfortunately, were only all male. So therefore, there is no longer even, we had a 2,000-year-old date palm, and we were able to actually perhaps have the lulav that existed at the time of the Mishnayos. They did a DNA on it, and which is a beautiful thing to prove. The closest related date palm in the entire world to the date palm indigenous to Eretz Yisrael is the Egyptian date palm. The Egyptian date palm. And to the extent that they've now joined the two together, and now they're having lulavim that are made from these date palms.
That's why they charge $250 a lulav.
Quite possibly. So, and how do we deal with all these different types of discoveries? Amongst the discoveries in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran, there were tefillin. Now, do we open up those tefillin, now determine whether or not those tefillin were Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi? Do we learn Aksavim? What do we learn when we have our hands on a 2,000-year-old pair of tefillin?
Well, if you find it Rabbeinu Tam, maybe he's going to go.
Okay, quite possibly. We'll get to that. So we'll see. So one of the most important things in halakha is to understand that you didn't discover America, that the Indians were here before Columbus. In all probability, there were people that preceded you in this exploration, and see how they dealt with it. So everybody, whoever has, there is a PDF that is posted on the shul WhatsApp. If you want to go through the Marmakomas, be able to have it in front of you, you can just pull it up on the PDF. So, I'll first show you two cases that the Gemara dealt with, a machlokes, and then we found historical evidence to support one side. So the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Samar Gimel Amud Beis states, "V'atani tzitz kimin tashel zor." It was talking about the tzitz, and the Chachamim were of the opinion that it wrote, Kodesh Lashem on two lines, two separate lines. Kodesh Lashem was written. The tzitz was wide enough, and it had two lines. Top line Kodesh, and then on the bottom Lashem. In walks in Amar Rebbe Lezer Rebbe Yaisi. Ani re'isim bi'ir b'roini. I saw it in Rome. I went into the Vatican. I saw what existed, and it was on one line. It's fascinating. Most of our belief system, it doesn't really have halacha, but most people assume the menorah follows after the picture that you find on the Arch of Titus, because the assumption was that that's where the clay mikdash went. If you go and read through the Rambam very clearly does not have, and that's why the Chabad menorahs do not at all look like those menorahs, because they follow after the Rambam. Yassin, remember, our tour guide taught us as to what the bottom of the menorah looked like, And that, very often people make assumptions based on shkolim that they found, based on a picture of a tapestry that was in the Vatican. So everybody has involved positions. There it doesn't have halachic ramification. Yes?
That's true, there were people visiting Eretz Yisrael back and forth to Rome all the time. So you have to assume that in Rome, they had an idea what it looked like.
Agreed. We're not. So, but now, what do we do when I have some sort of evidence? So look at the Meiri. The Meiri is the first, at that point in time, explaining the Gemara, because the fascinating thing is, we pass like the Chacham. The Gemara tells the story, the Chacham holds it on 2 lines. The Rambam in his Yara Chazaka, in the Mishnah Torah, basically dismisses, we'll see whether he fully dismisses the evidence that was presented by Rebbe Lezer, saying, I was in Rome, and I can tell you what happened. So the Meiri says, even though there was a Tana that said, a perfectly from religious archaeologist, a Tana, an explorer, got into Rome and saw it, because of the Kodesh Hashem b'shita achas, lo echishu et seyadu etzlam af be'edis re'ir. The Meiri says an unbelievable statement. He goes, I don't really care. In other words, I have and we'll have to see what the mechanics, why that should be, but he states that it's inconsequential what we find in Rome. We go into what it says in the Mishnayos. You have the Chachamim and Rebbe Lezer, halacha, Yachid v'Rab, halacha, Karamim. End of story. Don't tell me what happened. So that seems to be a very, very strongly dismissive position of allowing first-hand physical knowledge, evidence, to override what we understand to be the halachic process.
It's not necessarily rejecting his testimony that what he saw was what it could have been other explanations.
Oh, we're going to get to it.
More than one.
Okay, we'll get to it. The Rambam seems to be not so dismissive. The Rambam says, Kates and Maisat sits. What is the act that sits? Osa Tashel Zor, Rachav Sheh Etzbo, Sumak, and Ozen Ozen, the Kosel of Shnei Shitin, it goes from ear to ear, 2 rows, Kodesh Hashem, Kodesh Lamata, Hashem Lamala, V'im Kasav, Kasav B'shita Achas Kosher. But, he says, even though I pass like the Chacham, Bid de Avad, if it was written in 1 row, B'pa'amim Kasav B'shita Achas. He introduces and says, hold on a second, halacha evolves. And he's going to say, you know what? I agree to Rebbe Lezer. There was a time that very possibly they did do it in 1 row. How is the Rambam basically having both statements? One is, I believe the testimony is true, but what do I say? But the halacha still doesn't go that way. So the Rambam resolution of that challenge is that sometimes they wrote it in 1 row, and that's what Rebbe Lezer saw. But the prevailing halacha is not that way. That is the explanation of the Rambam, and the Kesef Mishnah explains the reason why the Rambam wrote it was because of the testimony of Rebbe Lezer. I think Rav Elyashiv explains perhaps the Kesef Mishnah. The Rambam gives us a certain clarity. He says why. He says, how can the Rabbanan argue on Rebbe Lezer? Vanan kaimlan kavasai. We pass him like that. Hari b'mitzias lo kenai. The facts are not that case. The facts bear out that it was 1 line. Vaynira the varbizet hari davar yadu. There's a rule. The yesh kayach l'sanhedrin levata divrei sechanedrin. It may have changed sometime during the bias. The later generations hear the psak of the earlier, but halacha evolves. And he says, that even shiurim may change. The Rabbi Yashin is saying. Maybe at one point in time, the halacha is if a person ate a borderline sheer isser and he doesn't know whether or not he's chayav a carbon, they used to write it down. Because they mamish believed Mashiach was coming immediately, and you know what? Mashiach's going to come, and then the new one's going to say, we don't pass it that way. The shiur is much bigger, much smaller. So we see that the shiurim can evolve, halacha can evolve. Therefore, he's saying, finding a testimony to a fact is only a picture into that window of time. It's not a window of time that can tell us for all of eternity, because it may have evolved. This is the way Rabbi Yashi said, okay. So that is our first example of an interaction found within the Gemara of science, history, and halacha. Next, now we'll bring it out actually to tzitzis, and we'll see how. I'll just take a pause and go to the present day poskim. So there's a Gemara in Baba Basra. The Gemara in Baba Basra says that Rabbi Bar Chana was traveling through the Midbar, and Zimna Chana Kozlin b'Midbar. Amelie came across this Arab guide. Ta'achli Mesi Midbar. You know what? I found where all the Mesi Midbar were buried. He's in Midbar Sinai. He goes, I found a tomb that's 3,000 years old. And you know what? Gavaldik. We can go see them. And he comes, and the Gemara says they found tzitzis. And so he decided he's going to cut off a piece. Cut a piece of the shirt off and bring it back so that but in the end, it didn't work. He got caught smuggling it out, and they made him put it back. He says, we put it back. Why was he cutting off the corner of the tzitzis? So the Rashbam says, his purpose was to bring the knaf tzitzis to the chachamim. You see, what he was going to do was, he was going to take the knaf tzitzis and say, we're going to be machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which halacha is like Beis Hillel. We have a normative psak, and he had every intention to say, listen, if I can bring evidence that the Meisei Midbar were going like Beis Shammai, I would overturn normative psak and establish it based on the science, based on the facts on the ground. Fascinating Gemara. So Rav Shechter basically said, I have a proof from here that if I can find you those tzitzis, and those tzitzis had tchielas on them, and I can prove what they were, if I can have the science, the Gemara is basically saying clearly that was his intention. And he was intending not only to be mavare safek, he was intending to overturn the klolei hapsak. He was going to use an evidence on the ground to overturn the klolei hapsak. So this is the way he wants to prove, and that's why it will fit very nicely with Shafter. Where's tchelas? Reb Chaim looked at it a little bit differently. He goes, you think it was an accident that he got caught smuggling it out? See, Mamash looked at the same story and said it wasn't an accident that he got caught. Must be the Ratzon HaBoirei is that we shouldn't be doing these things. Shouldn't be doing these things. The Ratzon HaBoirei is don't be doing these things. Don't use it. We want to remain within the world of halachic process. We don't necessarily want to jump outside of the halachic process and go into the science of things.
So maybe he took from me something.
Okay, it could be. Okay. I use a similar to that, it's just a tangent for a moment. Rabbi Yashin was asked, there was a custody case, and the woman made a claim, the father made a claim, I shouldn't be paying custody for this, I should be paying child support for the child. And he was making a certain claim he didn't have child support responsibilities. And he was demanding a DNA test. So Rabbi Yashin Paskin, it's also to do a DNA test. This is why. He quotes from a Taisus Yantiv. The Taisus Yantiv says that Eliyahu Hanavi is going to come, and he's a walk-in and he's going to be mavar all yochsin, except for Mamzer. He says he's not going to tell anybody about Mamzeris. Why? Because the halacha is Vaday Omer Mamzer Rachman go Safek Mamzer. And since this person was a Safek, the halacha is he's Vaday Kosher. And any person who wants to go ahead and convince us differently, you're following. You're right. This child might not be biologically that person's child. That's exactly what the Rabbi Yashin said. Halacha tells me don't do a DNA test. Rabbi Yashin was very strong in not doing DNA tests to prove patronage. He also, there was a whole movement in Eretz Yisrael that a number of adopted people wanted to find out their biological parents. Rabbi Yasha said, not a good idea, because you might find out something that will answer you for the rest of your life. Don't do it. So similarly, what is he saying? The halachic process beats out really what is Klape Shmai. Perhaps, now you see how they're interacting. Rav Shechter is looking at it one way, Rav Chaim Kanievsky is looking at it very differently. But let's go to another story. Now, Beit Shan, which is a huge machlekes also in the present, the Chazon Ish was asked, can we follow archaeology to be able to tell us which cities were part of Eretz Yisrael to be chayiv and Trumas and Maasros? Which ones were considered to have been developed and been settled during Bayeshem? So can we now go ahead and start carving out and including different parts of Eretz Yisrael? Do we go ahead and follow after the science of the day? So similarly, there was a story, Beit Shan was sitting in the point of Machlekes V'Dairos. There was a debate whether or not it had Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. In comes Rabbi Shua ben Zoruz, ben Chomav Shel Reb Meir, the Pnei Rebbe. So he came in front of Rebbe and he gave testimony. She'achol Allah shel Yeruk b'Beit Shan. I can tell you, I can give you a historical fact. I know it to be the case that Reb Meir ate a vegetable in Beit Shan during Shemitah year. He had no problem with it being the Hitter Rebbe as Beit Shan Kula Yadu. They all jumped on him. Rebbe went ahead and was mater all of Beit Shan. Then Chavru Alav Achim Beis Avim. Everybody got upset at Rebbe. They said, "Malkum Shavasecha va'Avos Avasecha Nogo Ba'Iser." Messiah, which we'll talk about this with the Beis Halevi speaks about. What do you mean? My Tata didn't do it. My Alta Zayda didn't do it. Where's your chutzpah to stand up and do it, Rebbe? For Dairis, we have been knowing this way that we were makbid in Beis Shan, and you're standing up and saying, "No, there's a new sheriff in town. We're going to be makbid Beis Shan." How do you do it? Rebbe comes along and says, "Hold on one second. Darish lahen mikrazeh v'kasis nachas and achosha she'asa Moshe." The sign of the medical association of the snake on the post. Right. It goes back all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu in the Midbar. It survived all the way through the Mishkan. It made it all the way through hundreds of years of Bayeshem. And nobody at that point in time felt it was an Avodah Zarah that had to be destroyed. In comes Yoshafat, and Yoshafat went ahead and destroyed it. No, sorry. Asa Yoshafat had destroyed it, and who was it? Who broke it at the end? It was Tzidkiyahu broke it. I forgot who broke it at the end. So then he responds and says, sometimes it could be hundreds of years later, somebody can have an insight, and halacha has to change. Rebbe says, I have an insight. No, it's a very fascinating. Rebbe is saying, you know what? I have an insight that based on testimony that I'm going to change things. Really? Listen to what this insight is. So Rabbi Yashiv understands. He says, I have a problem. How do you have a right to change? You now have an insight. But the meaning of this town has been for hundreds upon hundreds of years that what? To be ma'afish trumas and maasros. To be makbid on what's it called? On Shemitah. Listen to Rabbi Yashiv. Hikshu b'taisvis. Hey chita Rebbe Beishan hadvarim u'matar b'achem nog ba'isr. Iatar roshel atir b'fneim. The bottom line is, if people thought it was Aser, and they were noig in Isser, don't be an Ubuchachim and waking up and saying, I hold its mutter. V'tirtzu, dezeh hakol b'dvarim u'matar b'yadum ha'jein mutar. That a person can have a minig is a person knows it's a minig. I know it's mutter. Despite the fact that I know it's mutter, I am being machmer for a chumrah. Ela sheroitz lahachmer al atzma. He says, however, Rebbe was standing up and saying, the last 400 years you were all wrong. You made an assumption that this was part of biblical Eretz Yisrael, and you were mistaken. Now, Rebbe wouldn't have said it, I think, if it wasn't a question of geography. I don't think Rebbe would have gotten up and said, you know what, all the Tanaim that preceded me were B'toyes. But what Rebbe is basically saying is, I now made an assumption, I now have proof to the appropriate geography, whether or not this town historically was part of the second era of Eretz Yisrael, part of Bayeshayim. Okay.
The way you're trending, it sounds to me like we should be Batal Yom Tov Sheni Shabbos.
Is that on tape? No. Okay, good, very good. So there we go. So we have to change the tide right away. The Rambam tells you. The Rambam right away, and it seems to me. I believe this is why the Ravid is doing it. In the story, what was the vegetable they were matter? There were vegetables. In comes, look at the Ravid. Lo hitter Rebbe Maisi Yericho Peres Elin Shu Midarabon. Ella, he only was matter the Rabbanon. Why is the Ravid saying that? The Ravid L'chaim is saying that is because he does not like this idea of, okay, suddenly dismissing that something that may have a connection to a Diraisa. Okay, boom, they were wrong, let's move on. So therefore the Ravid made a very, very strong limitation on this idea of there's a new sheriff in town and I'm going to, hold your horses. Don't be messing with the Diraisas. The Diraisas leave alone. That seems to be the Ravid's position. Then the Chazon Ish was asked about Beit Shan and different areas in Eretz Yisrael, Lagabe Trumas and Maisis, also Lagabe reading Mikra Megillah. So the Chazon Ish says, I don't really like our present. He says, I'm not so convinced that you can rely on the map that's made of Eretz Yisrael. So dikta b'divrei Chazal. They weren't very makbid to be able to check and be able to divrei Chazal. V'shemos ha'arim nishtanu v'yeshin nimchu zichrum ubana al umdus. There were many times that they were destroyed, they rebuilt, and then they were built in their proximity, and they were given their names. He says, to be able to go ahead and have a map of Eretz Yisrael based on the names that exist, the Chazon Ish felt that it was based on Umdunus and he can't do.
No, it's like the original spots you can trust.
So now, it's interesting, just for a tangent for a moment, and those of you who have your paper, it's fascinating. You go to the last page. One of the earliest archaeological substantiations of our Mishnayos. In other words, when did we start? Where do we have our Mishnayos? In other words, again, where are the old Kisvei Yad? The oldest Kisvei Yad or whatever you want to call it, of Mishnayos, actually was found by the archaeologists, and it actually was found relevant to this shaila. It was found in a mosaic near Beit Shan. And it's called the Mosaic of Rachov. It's Ksovis Rachov. It basically was found in a 3rd century shul. It was on the floor of the shul. And if you can look at the pictures of it, it basically, it actually goes through, it lists Mishnayos in Shvius, it lists a Sifri, it lists the Tosefta, and it also Yushalmi. This is the oldest found, largest body of rabbinic, of Mishnayos, Toseftas that we have. And it's fascinating, it talks about Beit Shan. And it actually talks about the geography of where Beit Shan is and what the areas, and which areas have which halacha. And you're basically standing on a map, a halacha guide as to the land and how it goes. So how will we deal with this? But now I finally, on one hand, it is the oldest support and oldest found document of Mishnayos and Toseftas. On the other hand, now do I now suddenly take this and go to the bank with it? Do I literally take all the nuances of halacha based on it? Okay. The next story, which will be similar, is tefillin. So as I started off initially, they found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls tefillin. do I now pass tchielas based on what they found? So now, the Mordechai and the Smag told over a story that they were excavating in Eretz Yisrael, and they found near a kever by the kivrei of Yecheskel Hanavi fell over, and he brings down Ksam Eretz Shenafla Bima Shal Kever Yecheskel Umatzu Sham Tefillin Yeshenim Ayid Kiseder Rabbeinu Moshe Verashi. So the oldest found, and this we're talking now in the 13th century. The 13th century, they found a whole bunch of tefillin that supported Shitas Rashi. So the Smag was arguing to substantiate Shitas Rashi. At the same time, in the 13th century, the Piskei Taisus, which was written either by the Talmud of the son of the Rosh, the Torah Shulchan Aruch himself, or the Rosh himself. Obviously, and he tells over that Benardar v'Yushalayim matzu beizugan achas kirashi v'achas k'Rebbeinu, like you, Yehuda. He says, you're right. They have to find by the one by Yecheskel was the tefillin of Rashi. But I'm going to tell you, I found an excavation of a different one. So then now we suddenly have two sets of tefillin. One of the risks involved in relying on sets of one find, two finds, three finds, you're right, it could be isolated. And in fact, amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, amongst the other things, they found multiple going in each direction. So therefore, that one problem of finding is you don't know, once again, whether you're finding a time and place. Because perhaps a certain town had a certain minute. If you would go through, excavate the areas of Sfard, in 1,000 years from now, you will find most of the Piskei Halacha there were like the Sfardim. It's very possible different areas had different minhagim based on who were their poskim.
The groups that lived near where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls were actually, they were pirates.
Correct, they're right.
So it could have been their tzad of their perspective.
Very good, exactly. The Drisha came in and said, you know why those tefillin of Rashi were hidden? Because they were apostle, because they were the wrong. So what were they doing in a cavern? Why were they buried in Kfarim? He said the reason why a perfectly good pair of tefillin was buried in a cavern. So he says, you want to know why? He says, Adarabba, Matzi Lemem Reb Shulmayu, Kivush Akasim Ba'oso HaSeder, L'kach Kavrim B'Kivrim Kedin Svarim Tzulim Shenikru V'Nitmim B'Kivro Shal Tzadik. That perhaps you want to know why the tefillin were there, and it was the reason why they were excavated in a Beis HaKvaris and not excavated in a shul is because they were buried, because they were apostle. So again, sometimes you don't know all the history in the background to be able to. So we'll do one last. Shkola. And it's fascinating, and this goes to what you were saying, is to knowing, you have to know where you're finding the item. So there was a major machlekes between the Rambam and Rashi as to the weight of a shekel. And obviously that has major halachic ramifications. So the Ramban in his Sefer writes, Mamish strongly his position with the Shitas HaGainim Keneged Rashi. But then the Ramban himself writes, Barcheni Hashem, Alko. Hashem is giving me this following bracha. Shezachisi ubasi la'ako. I got to Akko. Umatzi sham biad ziknei haaretz matbei kesef. I found a coin. I found the shekel coin. I have one. It says, Mefuta b'pituchei chaysim. Mitzido echad. On one side is mako shekel, an almond, a stick with an almond thing on it. Mitzido hashem kein sluchas, a jug. On the two sides around the kosiv, mefuta be'eretiv, a very clear veheru aksav. I took the ksav, the kusim. I brought it to the kusim. V'karu miyad. They were able to read it immediately. And in the third page that you have there, you see a picture of the shekel. Now the shekel was written in what is called ksav ivri. The other one, you're in the second one. Yeah, I can use that one. It's written in ksav ivri. Ksav ivri was ancient Hebrew, in which the Karaites used for a much longer period of time than the Chachamim used. The Chachamim went and started using ksav ivri, which is the ksav that we're accustomed to. So Rabbi Yaakov, the Ramban says, it came a shekel. He couldn't read it. He had no idea what it said. So what do you have to do? You have to go use the people who know the language. So he went to a Karaite, and the Karaite read it to him. And he says, Asher nisa l'kusim. K'moshe muskah b'sanedrin. The kusim read it. V'karu min atzad echad. On one side, and it's very important the wording. It says shekel hashkol. The words written on that coin said shekel hashkol. U'mitzad hasheni Yerushalayim hakadosh. So again, shekel hashkolim Yerushalayim hakadosh. Then he then says he measured it, he weighed it, and it ends. Very interesting words. Rabbeinu Shlomo has a very strong support. What does that exactly mean? What are those words of the Ramban? But the Ramban now, he is the Bar Pluma. Now, he is quoting the Shita Saga'oinim, and he says, but you know what the facts are? I got there, Eretz Yisrael, and now I realize I was wrong. Seemingly he's saying that. The problem is, the Shulchan Aruch passes like the Ramban, not like Rashi. Why? If the author, if Rabbeinu Tam would have walked in and said, I found the pair of tefillin like mine Zeta, and you know what, I'm going to pass like him, l'chayra would be chayzer. Why do we still maintain the position in the Shulchan Aruch, the position of the Ramban, when the Ramban himself says he got to Eretz Yisrael, he saw the facts on the ground or in the ground, the facts in the ground, and he, l'chayra changed. Very good. That's what the Tashbeit says. The Abarbanel says, well, I have a different problem. It's 1,000 years old. It could have just, pieces could have fallen off. Why are you assuming that the weight...
Or when they made that shekel, maybe they made it a talus.
In which the Tashbeit says, kind of like what Benti says, and we'll see, maybe we even have a proof to what both these gentlemen are saying. The Tashbeit says, Ki ha-shekel shel Ramban eina ela shekel shel Torah. You also have to know the history. Our Gemara says the Chachamim changed the skull. They increased weights. There were times that halacha itself evolved. And jumping into a point in time, what do you mean? The Gemara says there was kasif suri, there were different, and specifically, there was a point in time that they made it bigger. He says, Kodem shasipa shtush, shar biyad kusim hayu. It was a kusi shekel. And maybe the kusim didn't want to listen to the Chachamim who legislated a change. You're right, you want to know why this shekel is too small. It's not because the halacha is like Rashi, but rather this was a renegade shekel. He says, then he continues, therefore, he wants to say that perhaps you've got the wrong shekel. Now, it was a tashbetz. Now, those of you who can look at the picture that you have, what was the wording on the shekel that was written, that was given to the Ramban? On one side it said, Yerushalayim HaKadoshim, and on the other side the Ramban said, shekel hashkolim. If you look, exactly. So now, if you look at all of our shkolim that we're finding now, it's different than theirs. Now think about it. Shekel Yisrael. The Karaites didn't want to go to the Jewish shekel. The Karaites specifically wanted to say what? Shekel shkolim. Where are the honest shekel? This is the shekel of all shkolim. This is the authentic one. The Karaites were claiming to have the ownership of, and the Chachamim were arguing with them, wrote on their shekel Yisrael. Now again, unless you know all of it, the problem is we're only always getting a partial glimpse. We don't, until we know all the facts, you don't know what evolved, what changed. So we see about these halachos, there was a certain aversion to change. The Gabi Shkolim, we maintain the Psak halacha that existed like the Shita of the Ramban. Legabe, the tzitzis, we never switched. Well, we never knew what we were supposed to switch about it. Legabe, Beit Shan, we'll have to see what happens. Tefillin, we clearly didn't change. So, Mirtzem, the next time we sit together for breakfast, we'll go through the archaeology that does support the tefillin, and we'll try to determine, the tchielas, and we'll try to determine how, based on some of the knowledge that we have now, how to incorporate that going forward. Do we say, you're right, the bottom line is, it's pretty strong. And the difference perhaps was their window was much smaller. We can argue as the window gets bigger, and that is what Rav Kook Zatzal said. Rav Kook Zatzal, when they came initially in the beginning of the archaeology and started arguing about towns with him, he said the information is too limited. He says, expand the body of information, make it larger, and then I'll make a decision based on that later. So Rav Kook definitely was much more open to it. We see that Rav Chaim was much more anti-it, and which perhaps is that Shita Samiri. We want to stay with the halachic process. We see Rabbi Yashiv looked at it and says, it was a tais what was happening in Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yashiv definitely was much more open to hearing the facts on the ground without necessarily, and allowing for a change and evolution in halacha. So Mir Tashem, the next time we'll deal with it, and modern day psakim as to how to deal with how we have archaeology and what we do with it at that point in time.